I always find teams that don't make a ton of sense statistically very interesting. And I think I found the perfect example of that for the 2024 season, and that is Auburn football. And you can just in general say that Auburn football never really makes sense, and that would be an accurate statement. But I want to take you through specifically this 2024 team and why, just numbers wise, it was weird. It was a weird team. But before we get to that, I'm Lucy. Welcome to my channel. If you love college football, welcome. This is the place for you. So, like, subscribe, comment. Auburn football 2024. Did I watch a ton of it? No. I didn't feel drawn to. There was nothing compelling me to watch Auburn football last year. I watched a few games, but it just wasn't a really pleasant experience. And I said, you know what? I don't need this in my life. Okay. And so that was reflected in their record. Auburn was 5-6, and they only had two wins in conference play last year. One of which was against Texas A&M, which is a big deal. That was a huge win, and there was a lone bright spot in the season. But outside of that, it was bad. Auburn was not. They were. It was not a good time. This is just another year compiling on a pretty rough stretch for Auburn football. 4 straight years of losing seasons. In between those 4 years, Auburn brought in Hugh Freeze. The Hugh Freeze hire was interesting because obviously Hugh Freeze has a very complicated and deeply unpleasant past that you can just look up. So there was already a weird sort of vibe around the hire, but it felt like when Auburn made the Hugh Freeze hire, it was very specifically for one purpose. Hugh Freeze is one of the only coaches that has beat Nick Saban on a semi-regular basis. It was pretty much just him. No one else was doing it. So Auburn was like, hell yeah, who cares? Let's beat Alabama, bring in Hugh. And then Nick Saban retires. Oh, oof. That's not, that messed up your plan a little bit, didn't it? Now we're in a post Nick Saban era, and Hugh Freeze and Auburn didn't beat Bama last year. Not a close game. And the vibe around Auburn football is weird and remains to be weird. And that is a school where I don't care who you are. If you're the head coach, you're always on the hot seat. Like they love to fire people down at Auburn. It's one of their favorite things to do, really. Drink that lemonade and fire coaches. So when I decided that I was curious and kind of what Auburn was looking like next season, I went back and I looked at the statistics from last season of just like what the vibe was, expecting to see a really horrendous football team, and that was not the case. Auburn, top 30 offense. What? Okay. I'm sure their defense was horrendous then. 31st defense. You've got a team who's in the SEC putting up top 30 numbers across the board, and they're bad, and they're really bad. And I just found that so interesting and fascinating, especially because if you look like just a little bit harder, you can see where Auburn really went wrong last season. And it was every time they got to the red zone, they were like, nope, I don't want to score here. Truly horrendous in the red zone. One of the worst teams nationally in the red zone. They had kicking issues, and Peyton Thorne had a turnover problem. He loved turning that ball over. They were like, okay, fine, we'll move the ball really well. We'll be really efficient. We've got a good running back. We'll have a solid offense. But if we get in that red zone, you better believe we're not going to score. Hell, we may give you the ball back. And the Auburn defense was actually pretty good. They were keeping them in these games. They were losing games by double digits to teams you would expect them to do that to, Georgia, Alabama. But also, they lost 3 out of their 4 one-score games. They were losing close games, which comes down to a lot of the time the little details of, hey, stop turning the ball over so much, and maybe if you're in the red zone, score some points. This is kind of why Auburn is a team I'm really interested in next year, because it's clear that there's a foundation. Like, it wasn't an anomaly that they had those numbers. They were doing decent things. They were just so bad at a few things you can't be bad at. This year, I don't expect Auburn to go 10-2. I just don't think that's going to happen. But I think this is the year that is really going to show who Hugh Freeze is and show what Auburn football is, because Peyton Thorne is gone. You bring in Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma in the portal, which was a good get. He was a name that people were talking about this offseason. How do I think that's gonna go? Basically, I have no clue. Quick aside, this Auburn football season is also going to be kind of a big indictment on Brent Venables in Oklahoma, because if Jackson Arnold comes here, has a great time, does really well, that's going to be a bad look. for Brenton Co. There were moments of promise with Jackson Arnold over the last few years. It just felt like he was really significantly mismanaged at Oklahoma and had absolutely no receivers, not a ton of help offensively. The line wasn't doing him any favors. It was just not like a pleasant time for Jackson Arnold and Norman, but you're going to Auburn now, who does have a really good line next season. You've obviously lost your running back, so you're going to need to sort of replace that production. But Auburn went really hard in the portal specifically for offensive players. They brought in a ton of help at receiver. They are prepping to give Jackson Arnold what he needs to have, a better functioning offense. Is Jackson Arnold up for that? I don't know. He is kind of a mystery to me because he's really someone that I'm like, are you a product of the system you were in at Oklahoma, which just wasn't good, and a product of just kind of really shitty circumstances there with a ton of injuries and just like all the vibes were off? Or was it Jackson Arnold? Was he overvalued? Like he showed weakness. He doesn't have the ton of range. You want to see him kind of get away from that short pass game that he loves. It's just I don't know. I really, really don't know. And Auburn doesn't either. So we'll see what happens. They brought in a lot offensively because that was sort of their pain point, that in special teams, even though statistically better than they were in actuality. Defensively, Auburn is really not changing a ton. They're really proud of the recruiting class they've brought in. They like how their defense is shaping up, and their defense was good last year. They were very good against the run. It's a solid foundation. And so they have chosen to really invest in sort of the recruiting pathway, which is something I like to see with transfer portal strategies of like, I don't love when teams go balls to the wall, give me 50 new players. I like it when you're very intentional about bringing in what you need. And Auburn was like, we really don't need a ton defensively. So they put all of their effort, money, and energy into getting some help offensively, which was the right call. And so I do think they're going to have a pretty solid defense next season. And speaking of recruiting, they are currently for the 2025 class, which I guess would, that ranking is set in stone now, finished ahead of Bama. Finished ahead of Bama. That's interesting. This is going to be a really interesting season for Auburn because I think that we underestimate how much of a foundation is already there, but it really comes down to Jackson Arnold. That is kind of the primary thing. And I would say Hugh Freeze. And if these problems sort of persist that are, fixable issues, turnovers, red zone offense, if Jackson Arnold is a swing and a miss, then you can look at Hugh Freeze and be like, all right, well, clearly you ain't got it. As for the schedule, it's not fun. It's not fun. They start the season at Baylor, which is tough. They're at Oklahoma. That game is going to be fun. I'm tuned in for that one. At A&M, they host Georgia, and they also host Alabama to close out the year. I personally wouldn't sign up for this schedule, but welcome to the SEC. That's all I've got on Auburn football today. I don't know why we're talking about Auburn so much. They're just interesting. They're just interesting to me. So if you liked this video, like, comment, subscribe, share. Let me know in the comments how you think Auburn's going to look, if Jackson Arnold is the guy, and if there are any teams you want me to talk about next. War Eagle. Even though your mascot's a tiger. Make that make sense. Make that make sense.